I'm Jody Sanders with American Patchwork and Quilting. Today's video is being brought to you by Baby Lock and the Crescendo sewing machine. Have you ever done foundation paper piecing or foundation piecing? Well, today we want to give you some tips and we're going to show you how to do this block. It's called Points of Pride. So one of the things you're going to do first is you're going to turn your sewing machine on and you're going to shorten your stitch length. The shorter stitch length will allow you to perforate the paper or the foundation material more easily and tear it out later. So make sure you lower your stitch length probably to about a 1.8. Usually works pretty good. The other thing you're going to do is probably change your needle. We're going to be using a 90-14 needle. And the nice thing about the 90-14 is it's a little bit bigger than the standard sewing machine needle. And again, it also helps perforate that paper better. So make sure you have some 90-14 needles and put those in. You're also going to want to change out your needle a little more often than you probably normally do, because as you're sewing through that foundation, whether it's paper or fabric, it's going to dull your needle more quickly. So you probably should change your needle about every 6 hours of sewing when you're doing foundation piecing. Now with foundation piecing, you can have a permanent foundation or you can have a temporary one. And examples of a permanent foundation would be muslin or flannel or a stabilizer. An example of non-permanent foundations are things like paper, wash-away stabilizers, tear-away stabilizers. We also have this great product that is paper that's made specifically for foundation paper piecing. And it's a little lighter weight than like a normal copier paper. So it's a great tool when you're trying to rip out all those papers later to have a paper that's a little lighter weight. And finally, you might also want to invest in what's called add a quarter ruler. These come in a couple of different lengths, the 12-inch and the 6-inch, and it's got a little bit of a lip here that you can see. And you'll notice in a little while when we actually do some sewing how that's going to be helpful. To make the Points of Pride block, we're going to be using patterns that have been printed off onto the special foundation paper piecing paper. And the really great thing about this method is it allows you to get those really nice sharp points because you're sewing on the foundation. That helps with that little wiggle room that sometimes you have. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take 2 pieces. We're going to put them right sides together. We've cut them a little larger than you need to cover the area because you want to make sure that you have plenty of room when you start to sew. So I have my foundation, I have my 2 pieces. This gray piece is going to be piece number 1. This turquoise or aqua piece is going to be piece number 2. So I need to put my pieces right sides together, and I'm going to flip over the paper because the fabric is actually going on the underneath side, and then I'm going to be stitching on these lines. So I need to have the fabric underneath. So I'm going to flip my foundation over to the solid side, and then I have my 2 pieces, and you can use your light here. And it's actually easier probably to start with this one. This is your long skinny point. So you can put that up. And then we're going to put the gray piece right sides together. And then I'm going to flip this over and look at it in the light and adjust it to make sure that I have at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And can you see that between lines 1 and 2, I'm overlapping about a 1/4 inch, and that's going to be my seam allowance. So once I know that, I'm just going to set my paper down very carefully, and then I'm going to grab a pin to just hold the layers together a little bit. Now you want to make sure you're not in that seam line at all, but you've got your pin that's got your pieces together. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it underneath my sewing machine, pull your threads back. You start off of the edge and then you're just going to sew directly on the line between 1 and 2. And this machine has a great little guide right here that you can also see. So as you're sewing down that line, the great thing about this method is it's going to give you really super sharp points that are sometimes hard to get if you're using a traditional template method. So go ahead and sew right off the edge, and then we're going to stop, and I'm going to take it out of the sewing machine and I'm going to clip the threads. So I have my pieces sewn together between pieces 1 and 2. I'm going to take this pin out because I don't need it anymore. And your pieces are still right sides together. You haven't done anything differently with the pieces. Now here's where you take the add a quarter ruler, and once you've folded that back, this will just fit in real snugly into that fold. Take your rotary cutter, and I'm just going to trim off any excess. And then we'll get rid of that. We don't need that. And now we're ready to do our pressing. So if you have the ability to have all of these things right close to you, it's really nice because you're going to be repeating this process as you make the block, and that way you don't have to be getting up and down to be going to your different stations. So now we're ready to press the pieces open that we've done with 1 and 2. We've just got our iron here, and we're just going to press. Now you don't want steam in your iron if you're using these papers, because what will happen is the steam will make the paper curl up. So we've added pieces 1 and 2 together. Now we're ready to add piece 3, which is going to be another gray background piece. So I've pulled one off of my gray pile, and I'm going to bring it over here again in the light so that it can help me see the line that I need to be sewing on. So you can see here I've got a little bit bigger seam allowance than what I need. So I'm just going to adjust it a little bit. And again, put it up to the light. Got a little bit more down here on the bottom. So you can just adjust. And that looks pretty good. And again, making sure that you're covering the whole piece that you're going to be sewing. So once I have that situated, remember you're going to want to pin it in place, just to help you keep those pieces from adjusting too much, but you don't want to be in the seam line. So you can put your pin over here. Now I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to sew between lines 2 and 3, pieces 2 and 3 in this straight line right here. It's a good idea to just kind of look and make sure that your pieces are right sides together. You haven't put them in the wrong way, and then go ahead and lower your presser foot. And again, remember you've shortened your stitch length. And we're just sewing all the way down that line again between pieces 2 and 3. So we've just completed sewing between pieces 2 and 3. And you're just going to keep adding more pieces in numerical order until you get to the end. And in this case, this is what your piece is going to look like. And then you'll turn it over and trim it, and you'll be able to see at that point those nice sharp points that you've been able to get because of the foundation paper piecing. Now, remember, you don't want to take your paper out until it's at the very end. So you can see here the paper is still in, as well as in this piece, we still have the paper. Now when you get ready to remove the paper, again, depending on what kind of foundation you've used, sometimes it can be easier than others. So a couple of tips for getting paper out that might be a little tough to remove is if you go back and you crease along the line again, and then use like the tip of a seam ripper. Now you don't want to be using the seam ripper itself, but just the little pointy tip can help release that paper. And if you have lots of little pieces of paper that are stuck inside, a tweezer works great to kind of work in and get those little pieces of paper out. You can also lightly spritz with a little bit of water, and that'll help weaken the paper a little bit to help you remove it. But you need to be careful. You don't want to douse it, and you don't want too much water because you don't want it to then distort your finished piece. And again, the reason why you're leaving the paper in until the end is so that you don't get any distortion. For our points of pride block, you can see we've got those concave and convex pieces that we're also adding at the very end. And so leaving the paper in until after you attach those pieces will allow you to get these nice square blocks. As you can see, perfect points are easy to achieve with foundation paper piecing.